So welcome everyone. Megan here. I'm here with Jennifer Litton Tidd, and she is with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. That is a mouthful, Jennifer.
Yeah, it is.
The Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. And I've been begging her to come on to talk to us and stalking her like I always do. And yeah, she's going to talk to us about what they're doing, how we can fit in, and how we can change the world with her. Can you tell us about the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint? Tell me how you got started, all of the things.
I got started kind of by accident. I've been a political activist for decades on other issues. I did a Facebook post about my son's hundreds of seclusions after I'd gotten the documents and put them all together and realized how many times he'd been secluded. And I was absolutely horrified to see the pile of documents once I got it. I put a Facebook post up. It was 437, and I decided I was going to stand out in front of my son's school district for 437 days straight to observe his pain and suffering in a seclusion cell. I wanted them to see how much time he had spent. And during that time, all these parents, because I put this Facebook post up, it got thousands of shares.
I remember it.
Yeah, it was kind of unbelievable. I was a little shocked by it. I didn't realize so many people, so many children were having that same experience. That was what was shocking to me. But I was getting calls, not just from every state in the United States. I was from Canada, from the UK, from Australia, from all over. And started realizing that this is much bigger than an observance of my son's pain and suffering, that, we have to do something. And so I started meeting, because of that Facebook post, a bunch of other parents. Guy, who is the founder of Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, he found me and said, "Hey, I've got this.
Right, we could use you over here."
Yeah, we could use you over here. Once I got the thousands of shares, I started thinking, oh, parents are going to come out and support me. And some did, but not many. And that was shocking too, because once I started finding out that this was happening to a lot of other kids, I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to be an outpour, and it's going to be everywhere. And that I was shocked at how many there were once people started calling. And then I was shocked once I found out how few, were coming to protest, to participate in direct action. And a lot of that was because they feared retaliation.
I was just going to say that. I could see the fear of, well, I don't want them to put my kid in a room because of the retaliation.
I see that point, but I think that it can't get worse. And the only way we can change it is to fight it. And the more of us there are, we're talking about planning a national action, actually international, because we're hoping Canada and Europe and wherever else will join us too, where we all go out in front of our school districts or state houses or whatever on the same day, and do. You're not going to get, it's not going to be the Women's March, 2 million people, but if we can get 20 or 30 people at 500 locations all over the United States, Canada, and other countries where they have restraint and seclusion, I think we can get some media attention and, get people on board with the issue to understand what's going on.
We had LaDerek Horn in here last week, and he was saying, we need to do more than just get the people who are directly affected involved. We need to be educating our church members. We need to be educating our Rotary clubs. We need to be talking, doing outreach everywhere, because then you have more people invested in our children. Our children are being abused, and then you have more people that would come out and would stand with the parents.
I tried to do a nationwide march last year, a couple months after it all started, and we didn't have enough allies. We didn't know enough people. It flopped because we're now close to 8,000 people on Facebook, close to 10,000 on all our social media platforms. So we're starting to feel like, we're getting in there, but it's an alliance between the disability community and also racial justice community. And somebody says, and maybe teachers and staff too, there are many, many teachers who have contacted me. One, they didn't have any idea about restraint and seclusion, like especially general ed teachers.
Mm.
Some said, I didn't know it was going on in my building
Yeah.
until, I started seeing these news reports, and they were mortified. And then others, I had one woman who worked in special education for 1 year. She went through all the schooling and everything else, and they trained restraint and seclusion and talked about it at school. But when it was a reality and there was an actual child screaming in a room and everything else, she stayed in special education 1 year and left because of it, because she said she just couldn't. Her classroom was next to a seclusion cell. And she said it was just, she just couldn't, she just felt paralyzed. She didn't want to get out of bed
Just
and
awful.
listen to the screaming in a seclusion room next door every day. So it's disproportionately used on disabled children and children of color, but it can be general ed kids too. We really need to understand what a pervasive human rights crisis this is. And not just one child 437 times, crazy lady standing in front of the building, but this is a worldwide human rights crisis. So Department of Education data 2015-2016 show disabled children are 12% of US schools, but 71% of restraints, 66% of seclusions, 26% of those who had one or more suspensions, 24% of those expelled, 28% of students referred to law enforcement. An American Bar Association study showed 65% of incarcerated minors were disabled children. The Literacy Project Foundation found that 3 out of 5 people in U.S. prisons cannot read. 85% of incarcerated minors have trouble reading. Illiteracy rates in prison are as high as 75%. In prisons, 68% of people in prison do not have a high school diploma. Now going to race, Black children are 15% of U.S. schools, but 20% of children restrained, 23% of children subjected to seclusion. Black kids are 31% of those referred to law enforcement. Black males make up 8% of schools, but were 25% of male students who received one or more out-of-school suspension. 23% of males who were expelled. Black girls are 10 times more likely to get a discipline referral or law enforcement referral than white girls. Black adults are 12% of the U.S. population, 40% of incarcerated individuals. And the last section, which really breaks my heart, at the intersection of race and disability. The numbers are staggering. 19% of Black disabled girls received at least one out-of-school suspension. Black disabled students represent 18.7% of special education population, but are 49% of the special ed kids who are incarcerated. 728,000 minors a year are arrested every 43 seconds. So something is going terribly wrong in our schools. It's not one kid, this kid, that kid. That's why I say it is a pervasive human rights crisis. It's in the United States, it's in Canada, it's all over the world. Angela Davis, who is one of my favorite human rights activists of all time, she said, when children attend schools that place a greater value on discipline and security than on knowledge and intellectual development, they are attending prep schools for prison. And that, I mean, by the statistics, we see that the most vulnerable populations are going from restraint to a seclusion cell, to suspension, to expulsion, to incarceration. And that's the school to prison pipeline.
So many parents will say, I thought I was, just like you. I thought I was by myself. I thought I was alone. I feel so isolated. But we're all it's like we're all isolated together almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
But separate.
Yeah. But that's why we call ourselves the Alliance. We need to form a fierce alliance between parents nationwide and obviously self-advocates as well. It's really their movement. We're their allies, and I think if we'd been listening to them all along, we wouldn't be in this cycle. Nothing about us without us, right? And if If we'd been listening to, this is traumatizing to us, this, and this, we wouldn't be where we are. But right now, our prisons are filled with neurodivergence. Black and brown children, 61% of prisons are Black and brown people. So they're less than 30% of the population. As somebody just said, they want it that way. Yeah, a lot of people say the system is broken. I actually think the system is working exactly how it's designed to work. Yeah. I don't think it's broken. I think it's designed to discard the vulnerable. There's certain people that are seen as expendable. They only have so much money. So let's, separate the wheat from the chaff, and we'll focus on these really high achieving kids, and the kids that are hard, we'll just put them in a seclusion room or whatever. Just to the parents realizing there's a growing group to connect to. It can be empowering for parents to keep fighting for change. It can be empowering, and it can also be overwhelming, because there's definitely a power differential, and we're at the bottom of the power differential. But I do believe, as a longtime activist, that people do have power, and the more people there are, the more power there is. Yeah. And then we were talking about earlier about retaliation. It's a lot easier to retaliate against 100 people than it is to retaliate against 100,000 people. One parent screaming is a fruitcake, and just a nut bag, and but it kept going down the list. Like 3 is a group of fruitcake, and then it got down, and then when it got to 30 parents, that's like, we better listen to them.
What have you guys gotten work that we can come in and meet you at where you are?
I think getting onto these pages, like Mona Delahook, like Ross Green, like the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, like International Coalition Against Restraint and Seclusion, share the information that we're putting out there, share the articles. People need to know about it. We've had a massive amount of press in the last year. My story, my son's story really, broke, and that was a big deal, and it became a national news story. Illinois had big stories. So the more stories that break, I think going to the press is a big deal. But also, I was just at a gathering with teachers, and I just started talking about what's going on and what happened to my son and how much better he is now that he's no longer being secluded. And, they said, well, what are we supposed to do? Well, let's start by not putting hands on children. But I think the biggest problem, the behaviors come because they're not being accommodated. IDEA passed, and it was promised that they would appropriate 40% per student in federal funding. And do you know it's at 13.7% per student, and it has never been federally fully funded since 1975. It was that 45 years since it passed. It's never been fully funded. There's another pervasive human rights crisis. 7.1 million children in special ed supposed to be protected by IDEA. They are not getting their education appropriately funded, and they have a right to that. So I think the most important thing is getting information out there, talking to other parents, trying to bring them on board. Obviously, most self-advocates are already on board. They've been on this.
Are you all doing anything when it comes to getting legislation passed?
There's a bill called Keeping All Students Safe Act. It was first introduced in Congress in 2009. It's been reintroduced every 2 years and not passed. It would ban seclusion outright in private and public schools. Seclusion has no therapeutic or educational value. So a lot of people ask us, what should we do to replace it? You don't need to replace something that has no value. So what we need to replace these things with is accommodations. So there's another bill, Fully Fund IDEA Act. We need to fully fund special education. Teachers need to be trained in modern brain science, and not in restraint and seclusion. We have to stop focusing on behavior and start focusing on what is causing the behavior. And that, I think that's, and I think we all need to be talking about it. I mean, you're doing your book club with Mona Delahook's book. She's incredible in talking about, there are many school systems now that have gone restraint and seclusion free, have gone to the empathy model rather than the behaviorism model. And basically the empathy model is asking people, why are you upset? Why are you covering your ears? Or why, which is usually a sensory thing. Or why are you screaming and kicking and throwing things? There's a reason they're doing it. There's no such thing as random behavior. And that, I think the focus has been so much on fixing kids instead of fixing what is causing the behavior. And that it's got to be a complete paradigm shift. So we can't really just ban restraint and seclusion. That will not solve the problem. We have to fully fund IDEA. I mean, we got big work. We've got big goals and big work, and we need everyone who listens to this to tell 50 friends, or organize a rally when we do it, or just share things, share the memes, share the articles, talk about brain science, read these books, Beyond Behaviors, Dr. Ross Green's The Explosive Child and Lost in School. We need to understand Steve Silverman's neurotypes. I mean, we need to understand what neurodiversity is, and we need to stop treating people who are neurodiverse like they're broken. What's broken is the world that sees us as, and I am a neurodiverse person. I'm ADHD and dyslexic. We are not broken. We need to be accommodated. And once we're accommodated, restraint and seclusion, they won't be there. They won't be there anymore. They won't be a factor.
We've been talking about universal design of learning as well.
Absolutely.
And making sure that, our learning environments are set up for the person who is least likely to access it. So, yeah, I mean, it's all systemic. It starts with the design of learning. It starts with the way behaviorism and how we're treating our children, how we view our children. It's compliance, not compassion. All of these things, like, we are on board.
Let me give an example of how behaviorism doesn't work. My son was in ABA, and it was a disaster. And for years, they kept telling me, you've got to empty out his room. Take everything off the wall, all the lamps out, take curtains, everything. Leave a mattress on the floor, okay? With sheets. That's how he's supposed to live. Basically like a prison cell. And I started taking things out. I never intended to take everything out, but I started taking some things out because he was breaking things, And then I started thinking, you know what? I see that as a metaphor for what they think of my son, that he's nothing and that he deserves nothing. And he's sensory seeking. If you strip a room down to a mattress for him, that's a torture chamber. So instead I decided, you know what? We're going to go to Goodwill. He's going to pick a bunch of pictures that he likes. His room got bubble lights and light bulbs that spin and all kinds of color with red wall. I mean, he's got 8,000 colors in there, tons of pillows, everything lights up. It's exact opposite of the empty room with a mattress. And guess what? He loves that room. That room is the metaphor for what I think about my son. And that is that he's amazing, he's colorful, he's interesting, he's bubbly with his bubbly lights. And that's how we need to think about these kids. And his behaviors, they have improved. Are they perfect? No, we're a work in progress. But we are trying to figure out when he is in distress, what is causing the distress, not what's bugging us.
Alex said, holy shit, Dr. Phil has advocated that exact thing, stripping the kid's room bare. What's that British lady that goes into people's houses like she's the babysitter and like she's Mary Poppins? She's like Mary Poppins, but the evil Mary Poppins or something.
Yeah,
I saw one on with an autistic kid, and the first thing she did was get an ABA therapist in there to oh, there it is. Thank you, Jessica. Of course you know. super nanny.
Yeah.
I mean, it was awful. And they were like withholding things from this little boy that couldn't talk, trying to force him to say a word.
He needs another modality of communication.
No. They were swinging him in a swing. And then she told the mom to stop swinging him until he said swing or whatever. I don't know. It was awful.
It's like treating them like animals, you know.
They're not. Dogs and cats pretty well, don't we?
That's true. I think the training piece, like I train my dog, sit, and then she gets a treat, and then lay down and she gets a treat. And that's how I was taught to treat my son. Like when he was little, you give him a little, and they didn't even get the whole gummy bear. You got like
a piece of a gummy bear.
And he's looking at that like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that for a third of a gummy bear. It's based on the assumption that they don't want to do well. It's based on all the worst possible assumptions about kids. Strip the room down, he's just going to rip it apart. We'll find out why is he throwing that thing in the room, you know?
The thing is that they don't care because that kid doesn't deserve to have a reason. Is that they don't care because that kid is not valuable enough for us to even bother with the reason. Yeah. I mean, that's what it is.
I used to melt down every day at school because I could not read. And the kids were brutal bullies, just awful to me. And if I melted down and got put in the closet, then I could skip reading group and then they wouldn't bully me. So I would rather be bullied by the teacher than by the kids. And it took several years of school before one of the teachers said, why didn't you want to go to reading group? She figured it out. She has this meltdown every day before reading group. I mean, I went through several years where no one asked me why you don't want, they didn't figure it out. But this was before APs, before any, she just instinctually figured out that she's not a little monster like everyone says she is. She's suffering. She doesn't want to be bullied.
There's a petition on change.org right now to ban seclusion,
prone, and supine restraint. Supine is on the back. The other thing is a lot of schools or a lot of places are moving towards just banning prone restraint. And unfortunately, other forms of restraint are dangerous, injure, and maim children as well. So you really can't just be prone restraint.
Yeah,
if there's any restraints, you're still in that human rights crisis situation. It's traumatizing. We have to get completely out of the restraint and seclusion culture. It's any of it is okay, then it's the kids are not going to be okay.
While a petition does not necessarily change legislation, it at least grabs their attention.
I would say, and not to be, self-peddling here, self-promoting, join the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint.
Tell us how.
5 to 8 posts a day. I guess we are pretty prolific, but start spreading the word. We need to get the word out. We're in the information campaign right now. We've got to get the word out. A lot of people don't even know about it. My mother was a teacher for over 30 years, and she didn't know restraint and seclusion existed. So a lot of teachers and a lot of the unions are for keeping restraint and seclusion, but I don't think they're representing all teachers when they're doing it.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I don't think most teachers, I would posit that 98% of teachers do not go to school to study education so they can throw children in seclusion cells and restrain them. They're just doing what they're taught, and we have to have a better way.
This is a great question that Jessica asked, because I have been private messaging with some anonymous people on Facebook, and they kind of say the same thing, that, okay, so our school has a ban on seclusion rooms, like you're not allowed to do seclusion. But then when they call it something else.
In the United States, the definition by the Department of Education is if they are in a room against their will and they cannot leave. But it doesn't have to just be a room, because we've seen kids secluded, like, with bookshelves. But if it doesn't matter what they call it. They can call it the calming room, the time. I mean, I've heard
Calm
hundreds of
down
names.
room.
There's the resource room, the quiet room, the calming room, the cry room, the scream room. I mean, all kinds of wonderful names. But if they are in that room against their will, door open or door closed, that is seclusion. So, and a lot of times they'll say they wanted to go to the room, but once a kid is in a restraint and seclusion cycle, they're taught that I can't calm down unless I go to seclusion. They basically start institutionalizing the kid. And then, like when my son was getting secluded at school, I don't have a seclusion cell at home. So, and I'm not going to I refuse to turn his bedroom into a seclusion cell. So I can't even generalize what they're doing. He should be learning to do breathing, get on a yoga mat, do something that he can do at Target if he gets dysregulated, at home, at grandma's house, wherever. So it's not even a realistic solution. So that's what it is. Anything that you're alone. A sensory room too. A lot of them say sensory, but if there ain't anything in the room, it is not a sensory room.
You can't really say that because when you're in school, they are not in charge of themselves. So it's not like,
yeah, that's true.
You can't say that. Like, oh, well, he wanted to go there.
Well, now there are some kids. My oldest autistic son is sensory defensive, and he likes to get away alone sometimes. He had like an art studio when he was in high school, and it actually was the teacher cleaned out a closet for him, and he had all his artwork all around. It was kind of like a little studio, and he loved that. That was a getaway. But it had artwork around. He chose to go there for, it was it wasn't a cement cell or a padded cell like what most seclusion rooms are. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess there is
I would say that take them out of the classroom, let them take a walk. If they've got a one-on-one help, sometimes I just am afraid if you have any seclusion rooms at all or sensory, if it's a sensory break, you mean to get to have no sensory input, or let me ask you if they need a sensory break, so they need to get away.
Okay, if they just need to get away, I guess.
But there could be a designated area either in the classroom or right outside the classroom.
I mean, I know that there are some schools, and I think that this is mainly in older kids' schools, that they have created rooms like that, like hangout rooms almost. Yeah,
if it's their choice. If it is their choice to go, or they say, I need a break. I need a break. Can I have a break? Like my son he asks for breaks, and they drop everything and they take him for a walk. My son goes for walks, but they just take him out on the hall and he goes walking around for a walk. So
right. I mean, and it should not be special education specific. It should be for any kid that needs.
Well, and that's the problem is this is very discriminatory.
I think sharing petitions on Twitter, tagging school board members and elected officials is a way to get more attention and to try to push for legislation.
We just have to be as visible as possible. First, educate yourself, that's why I say, come to our page, come to our website. We have a lot of information. We've done research. We've got a research paper by Beth Talley, who's our educational director, who's amazing. She did a paper on behaviorism. She did another one on school to prison pipeline. We have a lot of guest bloggers. We'd love anyone who has experience with restraint and seclusion. If you're a self-advocate, especially, or a parent, we'd love to publish your story. Go to the press. And that's what we've been doing. All of us have just been going to the press.
So there is a bill up there now. Are you saying keeping Autism Safe Act? Is that a bill that is up there now? It's like in limbo?
I mean, it's not started moving again, but I would love for everyone who watches this to call your congressman, and the number that's the congressional switchboard is 202-224-3121. And if you don't know who your congressman or senator is, you just put who is my congressman, and you put your address in, and it'll give you who your representatives are. and who your senators are. So find other parents in your state, and we can do another post on the Alliance. We do them every so often. Where is everybody from? So parents can find each other in their state. Some states have already banned seclusion. Some have banned, 31 have banned prone restraint, although a lot of them don't follow it. So, and I know Massachusetts banned seclusion, but they still have seclusion rooms. They just call them calming rooms.
They call them something else. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but gathering with people in your states, but also obviously we want the federal legislation. It's just that it's been 11 years since this started, and we don't want to not work on the state level, praying and hoping that this federal bill will pass. I'm in this till that federal bill passes, but I'm also working on the state level as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think that we can multitask because
throw as much up on the wall as you can. Also work within your school district, because I know people who are in states that don't have great restraint and seclusion laws, but then in their school district, they've gotten changed. They've gotten CPS implemented. Guy Stevens has done that in his district, and he's our founder at AASR. In his district in Maryland. There's some I know of in Virginia that have gotten their school districts to switch over to CPS, or UCARU is another one, that they don't use restraint and seclusion. So, but there are quite a few schools and mental facilities who have gone restraint and seclusion free. So we're not just, howling at the wind, like talking about something that can't be or that's never been. There are quite a few. UCARU is in 28 states now, and quite a few, and hundreds of schools and school districts and facilities. So
I'm not sure what that is.
UCARU is, there's Grafton Health Systems in the state of Virginia, in our state of Virginia. They had a restraint death in 2006, and decided, we should probably stop doing restraint and seclusion. So they started trying to design a program that was restraint and seclusion free. So their slogan is comfort over control, which is so perfect. But they've gone 100% seclusion free in all their facilities, and they're 99% restraint free. And they're a residential facility. They were where Northern Virginia schools sent the very most challenged kids, distressed kids went to Grafton. So, I've had people, when I've talked about it, say, oh, well,
You're talking about in Williamsburg?
No, it's actually out in Winchester. It's up kind of more in the north. But if you look up UCARU Systems,
I don't know how to spell that.
Oh, UKERU, UCARU Systems. And they're in a lot of school districts. And Ross Green also, his CPS, the Collaborative Proactive Solutions. That's another model that's out in a lot of schools, and they go restraint and seclusion free when they use these models. So we don't even have to invent the wheel. There are programs that exist that we need to get school districts, to get our states, to get our federal government on board with treating neurodivergent and children of color like human beings. That's our comfort over control. That's our kids do well if they can, is what Ross Green says. And
it's really important to learn for yourself what your school district's policies and laws are.
The thing is, if you look at the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook for my son's district, you think, oh, there's no way a child could be secluded 745 times in that school district, except that's what happened to my son, so I think more importantly than looking at the Student Rights and Responsibility booklet is to ask your child, have you ever been locked up alone in a room? Or do they hold you down at school? And kids who do school avoidance, where they're screaming and kicking and not wanting to get on the bus, there's a reason. It's not. I kicked and screamed and didn't want to get on the bus because I was bullied.
You have to listen to your kid.
And I was bullied by my teachers. And my parents were good parents. I didn't tell my parents anything. Most kids think when I was being restrained and secluded and mistreated, I thought my parents knew. And because I thought, how could
Right.
they not know? Most kids think So your kid, there are so many children that are being I knew they had restraint and seclusion, but I didn't realize how much they were restraining and secluding my child. And he's non-speaking, so he couldn't tell me. He told me the only way he knew how, which was through behaviors. He wasn't given access to communication modalities, and he was communicating the only way he knew how. I always say he was writing because he was unheard. And now that he's heard and he's no longer being secluded, he's in a facility that he's in a school that has no seclusion at all. He's no longer being secluded. His behaviors have improved dramatically. 1.7 million students are in schools with police but no counselor. 3 million students are in schools with police but no nurses. 6 million students are in schools with police but no school psychologists. 10 million students are in schools with police but no social workers. 14 million students are in U.S. schools with police but no counselor, nurse, psychologist, or social worker. Far too many that are basically prep schools for prison. And when you have a police officer and no social worker, psychologist, nurse, or anything else, when a child's in distress, they call a police officer and they get arrested and they get carried out. And kids that are 5, 6, 7 years old are getting arrested. We have to do better. I mean, I have, books of walls of numbers and statistics that our schools overall, there are some good exceptions out there, but overall, our schools are failing neurodivergent and children of color. Unless that child, I had that one advocate that taught me to read, but if I hadn't had that one teacher who intervened fairly young, I don't know what would have happened to me. Now, I'm a white female from a privileged family, so
You're privileged,
probably
right?
I wouldn't have gone to prison. I don't know though. So much what I could have been a drug addict. I don't know. There's so many people who go on to drugs, go on to not good things when they can't read, when they can't. What would I have done if I couldn't read? I wouldn't have gone to college. Um, Kids are just passing through, going grade to grade. Or I don't know if you saw my interview with Stan Maloney. He's an autistic self-advocate. Same thing. He was in elementary school, and they kept telling him he's on his way to prison. You're on your way to prison. You're on your way. Who does that? Who talks to kids?
A lot of people do that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're getting my blood pressure up. People would count children out in the very beginning. Does that make you feel better?
Yeah.
To say that?
Okay. I think it's not a good cycle that we're in.
Holly.
Yeah.
Prison isn't the only bad outcome out of this situation. The trauma.
At best, they don't get to their potential. If you can't read, you're not going to be able to get to your potential. Or a lot of them go on drugs. That they don't have the lives that they could have if they were living up to their full potential. No, it definitely is, and I've probably emphasized prison too much. There are a lot of other things that happen. There's suicide also. The suicide rates among neurodivergents is unusually high compared to a lot of other populations. So when I'm sitting at an IP table, because I'm an educated person, I understand a lot of what's happening, but I don't understand a lot of it. But a lot of these moms say they walk into IP meetings and it's this table of highly educated, doctor this, and lots of acronyms after their name. And this is just a mom who doesn't she feels lower. She feels like she's being talked over.
Oh yeah, we talked. This is exactly what we talked about in the other meeting with Laderick Horn, and when he was talking about the intersection of race and disability. I mean, why are we even using acronyms? Period, as if everybody knows what the acronyms are.
Yeah,
and we have this big table that is so intimidating.
Yeah,
I'm not easily intimidated. And what do? They hand you Here's your rights and responsibilities. Do you have any questions?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course you don't have any questions. You don't know what the hell is in it.
Well, and Holly made another she says she gets overload from her son's IP meeting, because even if you do understand a lot of legalese and there's emotion in that IEP meeting. They're telling you things that are painful to hear. So where you may normally, like, I always tell people, pair up with a friend. I regularly go to my friends, and now we're teleconferencing in her IEP meetings, because sometimes I can hear something, or sometimes, they're talking over her, and I say, will you please stop interrupting her?
Right.
And it's a what's the word? An objective, or actually it is an objective. They're all subjective. So she actually has someone sitting on her side of the table. But yeah, I mean, go to each other's IEP meetings.
Yep.
So that there's strength in numbers. So you feel like you have that ally. I mean, it's great if you can hire an advocate or an attorney, but if you can't,
you don't, I mean,
bring
honestly,
your friend,
you don't need it. Yeah, bring somebody who is not emotionally involved, or be that person for somebody else. Go to like your Muslim community center, or go to this church, any place, and say, hey, if anybody needs help with, your kid's IEP, I may not know much about it, but I'll come with you, and I'll call bullshit on what. Not saying that they're always trying to dupe you or anything, but I will advocate for you, and you don't have to know a whole lot of stuff.
I'm reading a comment from a special ed teacher here. I have my sons, and I don't want teachers to come upon me thinking that I think teachers are all terrible people. My son's at a school now where his teachers are amazing. They're accommodating. The online experience has been amazing. It is possible to have a great IEP team and great special education teachers. It's just there are a lot that aren't. And I mean, especially, I don't know, public and private, because I've heard horror stories from both public and private schools. But
no, and I don't ever want to give the impression that I'm against teachers.
With the Restraint and Seclusion, there's a whole, I think it's an over $1 billion, I'm doing research on that now, an over $1 billion industry. They go around to schools and teach teachers to fear children. And that's why, the article I recently wrote about the words that are used about our kids, they're violent, they're aggressive. I mean, you did a meme about it too. Non-compliant, insubordinate. That IEP document is a legal document, and you need to not let them write that your child is violent, that he's a vandal, these words describe felonies. If your child gets in trouble at some other point, that's a legal document. That's evidence that can be used against your child. So you have to be really careful with, even if the child's never going to see the document, which, I have an adult autistic son. He wanted to read all his old IEP documents. So I wish I'd had them take those words out. I wish I had thought of it at the time. So,
I mean, I guess we do as good as we can. And also, I mean, I don't want to say these teachers are doing this because they hate children, because I don't believe that. I think that
that's how they're trained.
Is systemic. I can remember going into my first year teaching. I started teaching because kids are cool. I want to go do kids stuff all day. I like making things. So I became a teacher. I was shocked at how mean I had to be to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, I was just like looking around like, dang, y'all are mean. and I taught at a school full of amazing teachers, like super amazing teachers. We were taught behavior management. Yes. I didn't want to fuss with any of that stuff. I didn't want to do red, yellow, green, nothing. All name on the board, check marks. It's too much to keep up with for me. But
yeah, I don't know if it's even that effective. But no, I think there's a whole bunch of factors. There's standardized testing, which causes incredible stress, right? I think that traumatizes they don't get funding if they don't get certain test scores, they're not going to get funding for their schools. So they end up, a lot of schools are, training to take the test, and they have to do that because if they don't, they won't be funded. So then you've got special education's not funded. They're not even close to, it's not even half funded. So they don't have appropriate staffing to provide appropriate accommodations, which is these kids, right? That's why we need to fully fund IDEA. There are all kinds of, and then the restraint and seclusion culture, because of the stress of standardized testing, the kids get segregated out into special ed, self-contained special ed, so that their test scores don't count into the pool, or out, go to separated out into the private schools so that they don't get their test scores mixed in, so it doesn't lower their test scores. Let's see, what's your take on PBIS? We have an article about PBIS that Beth Dolly did. I think that I'm not a fan of behaviorism. So that is based on Lovis and behaviorism. PBIS, PBS, ABA, they're all not, forms of behaviorism. And actually in PBIS too, they allow for restraint and seclusion. So
we talked earlier in this month about raising the bar in general, like the bottom of the, and raising up. And I think that restraint and seclusion is the bottom of the bar.
It's the bottom. Actually, I would say calling the police is the bottom of the bar, but restraint and seclusion, that's what it leads to. It traumatizes children, and then they end up being engaged with law enforcement.
I wouldn't even dare to compare them and contrast them. I mean, they're just all really, really bad.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
because I'll smash it harder.
Because you smashed it.
It's a continuum, really. It's not one or the other. Oh, they're going to restrain or call law enforcement. Usually the kid who's got the law enforcement engaged, they started in the restraint and seclusion cycle in preschool, kindergarten. If a child is suspended in kindergarten or first grade, they're 10 times more likely to be incarcerated. So, the things that we're doing to little kids, a lot of people say, I've heard people say, because most restraint and seclusion is done on kids under 10 years old. But I have heard people say, oh, restraint and seclusion works because they don't do it as much after 10 years old. But that's because they can't physically control them as much. So then they call the police. So it's not working. It's making it worse. I guess with my son, with all the seclusions, once I found out, after I ordered all the paperwork, I just thought at some point, did somebody say, you know what we're doing isn't working. Maybe we should try something else. But it doesn't really, that's not how it's done. And it kind of drives, I don't understand it. The other thing about restraint and seclusion that I haven't mentioned is that it hurts staff and teachers as well. Grafton, who I told you about earlier, they actually, when they cut out restraint and seclusion, their teacher injuries went down, their workman's comp went down, and their teacher turnover went down because they weren't in a combat zone anymore. And the teachers weren't thinking of the kids anymore as enemy combatants. It's like, oh, these are our students. So they were much happier. So everyone, I think a lot of teachers are afraid to stop doing it because they fear, they're taught to fear the kids.
And they might think it's the only way. They might, because they're being told that.
But the good news is, if you go to Ukeru Systems, UKERU systems.com, and there's these school systems, admins and teachers from all these different school systems talking about how amazing it is to go restraint and seclusion free, how they're no longer getting injured. I've had teachers send me pictures of terrible bruises and lacerations that were given them by students. And it breaks my heart. My mother was a teacher. I don't want to see teachers get injured. I care about teachers. But to me, when I see those pictures with the bruises and the lacerations being given to them by children, I don't think that proves that restraint and seclusion should remain. I think that shows that underscores the fact that restraint and seclusion is failing. If children are getting injured and traumatized, if teachers are getting injured and traumatized, this is a disaster. It's not working. It's a crisis.
Jessica, you're saying that basically they're kind of like almost trying to protect the kids because if they don't do it, they'll call the police on the kids.
Well, a lot of parents are told that. I was told that
Oh.
we didn't agree to restraint and seclusion, that they would have to call the police on the kids. But again, if the kids are appropriately accommodated, they're not going to have the behaviors that rise to the level of having to call the police.
All right. Well, consider us in. We are in it with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm really grateful to everybody who listened and asked questions and everything else. And again, I do want to stress that we are not anti-teacher. We think teachers should be paid more. We think they should be treated better. We don't think they should have to do standardized testing. We don't think, there are so many issues that we are in 100% concurrence with teachers. We also don't blame restraint and seclusion on them. Blame it on the system. It's happening because they're not appropriately funding or supporting or paying or treating teachers with respect either. And it's a toxic culture all around.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it.